Okay, hi. So you are Preston and we met on Facebook and I mean you caught my eye because you had such a an in-depth and really thoughtful post about eating meat and why it's so important, especially, for Black people. So I was really fascinated and I wanted to hear more about you and who you are and how did you get into this and why yeah, tell me everything.
Definitely. So yeah. Um, and by the way, I just want to say thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak with you. It's really an honor because, like I said, you are one of the actually probably the most important voice that kind of pulled me into this lifestyle. So I have to really thank you for that. And but a lot of what I do is um, I guess you can say activist work. I'm a music teacher. I'm a music teacher at the Department of Juvenile Justice here in South Carolina. Um, I also am a content creator, and a lot of what I do is really thinking about the radical Black tradition, the Black imaginative tradition, and how that applies to media. So I do things like I talk about zombies and comic books and anime and manga. But one of my other passions really is health and just so I do a lot of things where I'm reading a lot of theory constantly and thinking about how Black people are impacted by various systems. And so when it comes to the way that I've been eating, so um, I moved back here to help my family with their businesses. I lived in Atlanta. I went to Morehouse College where I majored in music. And I lived in Atlanta for about 10 years. And I came back here and got back here. Wasn't really thrilled to be back in South Carolina. That's where I live. And I wanted to be on the first thing out. Like it could have been a dog sled. I would have been on it. So, but I wanted to be out. And so I went through a very severe depression, actually. And my mom got me started with Zumba. And so eventually I became a Zumba instructor and I got really into fitness. My dad started getting me into personal training. And we went on a trip together to Virginia. And while in Virginia, we saw the CrossFit Games. And we were especially wowed by this sister named Elizabeth Akinwale. And, I started following her and I was like, what is this thing, right? uh, I got to find, what this is. So we started looking up CrossFit. Come to find out, there was a box like a mile away from our house. So we started with that. And that actually started me on really thinking about my diet in some very different ways. Before I was doing everything that I was taught, I guess you can say, to do the things that made the most sense. I was trying to cut out fat. Um, I was trying to be more plant oriented. And, but with CrossFit, the whole lifestyle, I guess you can say the culture of CrossFit involves the paleo diet. And so with that, there were things that they were restricting that to me had always been the more intuitive kind of decisions to make with eating. So they were talking about cutting out grains and cutting out like some of your beans and stuff like that. And I was like, wait, what is this about? Through paleo, I found the keto diet. And at first, when I started, I remembered, or when I was thinking about starting, my parents were like, I don't know, this sounds crazy. Even though they had done the Atkins, but they were like, yeah, this sounds like kind of nuts. And but I started it and I felt amazing. I mean, past the keto flu, all that kind of stuff. But I felt great, and I think part of it for me was beginning the process of realizing how communication with my body had literally been cut off while I was eating all these other foods. I started figuring out certain signals that my body would you know, would give me that something was wrong or that something wasn't for me. For the first time, I could eat, a large meal and not conk out afterwards or not feel completely miserable. Um, I started noticing stuff like I went 3 years without a stomach ache, and I was
Nice.
just like, you know, but growing up, I figured stomach aches are a part of life, like headaches, right? Like, like, that's something that just happens and it's completely natural. And I remember thinking one time, I was like, yo, it's been like 3 years and I haven't had a stomach ache. And so I started getting more and more into research behind keto, started finding some people who were talking about this more radical version called carnivore. And I came across some of the real popular names, Paul Saladino, Ken Berry. And, one thing that got me was, like Saladino lived among the Hadza for, I think a few months or something like that. And, I respected that, but I was always like, wow, like we have all this ancestral knowledge around nutrition that is quite literally cut off to Black people, because not many of us are able to just up and go to Tanzania and live among the Hadza. We don't have the money for the research a lot of times. And then when it comes to us, people aren't doing that kind of research. And I remember when it came to carnivore, I started doing some research on it and I came across a podcast that you spoke on. And you were talking about not only your own journey, but you were talking about the journeys of so many other people, Black people, who were correcting things in their own lives and in their own bodies, like psoriasis, eczema, and then even stuff like, I've been in your Black Carnivore group and looking at the people who are saying like, I'm dealing with IBS and Crohn's and living fantastically. I know for myself, when I went carnivore, I was suffering from seborrheic dermatitis and that started going away. And then I started adding back in like low carb wheat products, like the low carb wheat tortillas. And I'm like, I keep getting these sores in my head. So my body was letting me know, like, this is not for you. On top of that, I remember very specifically you talking about how it is that Black people who are living with diabetes are more often to have amputation suggested to them as a solution, whereas with other people, they're more likely to, try different things. And this has been something that's very near and dear to my heart because it's almost to the point where, in my family, for instance, with hypertension and diabetes, when I was 26, my blood pressure started trending up. And I was like, well, runs in my family is going to happen, right? But now I go to the doctor, they're like, everything is fine, blood pressure is always normal. Of course, they're always talking about my cholesterol, but there have been some, I've read all the studies about that. But I just realized how, and I really started thinking about how many of us have been taught not only the wrong things about diet and nutrition, but on top of that, how many of us have been taught that certain diseases that we tend to die from more often or have life-altering surgeries around, how we have been really taught to accept that as actually near inherent to us, like on a genetic, biological level. And to me, to say that we are somehow genetically and biologically predisposed to death and pathology that's textbook anti-blackness. And so in the entirety of the carnivore community, from what I was hearing, one, you were a Black voice. And on top of that, you were a Black voice addressing them from a Black perspective, you know, saying that this is a way that people are beginning to take, are being able to be more responsive to the fact that things are things are almost never or never stacked in our favor. It's sort of, I guess you might even be able to call it a kind of agency. And I think that with the proper education, you know, people can begin saying, well, this is what I need to organize around in my city, in my town, whatever. And so, you know, I've been very much vocal about everything that I'm learning, everything that I'm finding out, because yeah, I get it. A lot of us live in food deserts. I lived in one for 3 years. And sometimes good quality food is hard to get by. But if you just know what you need to be moving toward, then you can get to a point where you can start organizing or demanding things of the people who represent you. And so that education is so important. It is so incredibly important and vital. And it goes beyond what I think we've been, well, no, I know we've been taught to think about food and, you know, how it operates, you know, with our bodies.
Hmm. Wow. So that's quite a story then. So how did so how did you sort of make that switch to eating carnivore, and what has it done for you?
So last year, actually, because I've been some sort of low carb for about 12 years now. But last year is when I switched to carnivore. And really what happened was, so I'm the kind of individual, I can't wean myself off of much. I'm a cold turkey kind of dude.
Yeah.
So, um, after I joined, excuse me, after I joined your carnivore group and after I had done some more research, see, a big thing for me is cooking, because like I like to cook, I'm good at it, but um, now I'm thinking, oh, this is just meat and animal products. Like, I got to keep this interesting. Um, but then also for me, I had to start really thinking about changing my thought process around food. Um, and a lot of that, even still, while just keto, was still available to me. You know, I could do the keto brownies and, you know, so I really still could eat in a way that modeled the mentality of consumption of the West. And I think it's not, so like a lot of times what happens is, I think what most people do is they critique the fact that the West has very unhealthy foods, whether it's the processed foods, whether it's the things that are barely food at all, or the overabundance of like sugar and stuff like that in everything. Like I'm to the point now where I'm like, is ranch getting sweeter? No, but last time I had like spaghetti sauce, I was like, God, what, why the sugar? But but um, but part of it for me was also changing the way that I thought about food, and so I started thinking about food as, well, really as fuel. Like, and this is not to say that I don't want to enjoy food. I mean, like I definitely want to enjoy how it tastes and all that, which is still very much possible still. Um, but I had to think of it as, this is you giving your body what it needs to do what it does, or what you want it to do, so that you can live the life that you want to live. Like I'm very active, and I'm, trying to get back out into nature and kayaking and hiking and so on. So, um, and so for me, it was thinking about food less as entertainment, thinking of food less as remediation for various emotional states, you know, and which in itself also gave me the ability to then say, well, I can't just go binge a whole batch of almond, low carb almond brownies. So if I'm depressed, I need to figure out what that's about. Which interestingly enough, being on carnivore taught me that depression itself, yes, it is very much a mental thing. It is very much an emotional thing. But I don't think that people oftentimes realize how much depression is physical sensation.
Mm-hmm.
I began to realize when I switched over, I was like, there were times when I would be like, I feel fine overall, like mentally, I'm good, emotionally, I'm in a great place, and I still feel depressed. And it was literally physical sensations that I was having from the foods that I was eating. And like I said, I haven't been on sugar for like that for 12 years now. And so, I'm just like, what could that be? And so I think that once I kind of found that out, the first month was a struggle because I was like, oh.
Wait, but so were you eating artificial sweeteners when you were on keto, and then when you went carnivore, you cut all of that out as well? Or what was the challenge for you making that
The
switch?
challenge, I think, for me was, so I went pure carnivore first. So I didn't even do plant seasoning, which
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
just salted meat. But so that was a big challenge for me. I also went strictly on water, and
As opposed to what? What were you drinking on keto?
I would do coffee, like, and I would do
Oh,
it
I
like
see.
sweeteners or sweet tea, but the 0 calorie sweet tea. I used to be, I'm not gonna lie, like Coke Zero is great to me. But like that's something that I kind of use as a treat for myself every now and again. But yeah, and also I think another thing for me was learning to eat nose to tail. Getting organ meat can be very difficult sometimes, and you know, and also good quality organ meat, because you don't want to eat just anything's liver, just any kind of liver. I mean, because it filters. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that has also pushed me to start really looking at local farmers
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
stores that have relationships with local farmers, which that's been fun. I've had to stretch my palate a good deal and try new things. So I've learned to make bone broth. And I mean, I've seen the difference in that in my nails. For the first time, I was able to kind of grow my nails out a little bit, and they were actually stayed, like they weren't breaking off and brittle and bending, and I'm bleeding all over the place. Hair, skin, got my parents on it too. They love it. And so, during the winter, we're making soups, we're making chilies, stuff like that, is bone broth. And like me, even now, because I drink hot things all during the year, so I'll just take a bit of it, salt it up, and warm it up, and just drink it. Uh, Almost like I would coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes drop a little bit of butter in it. And but yeah, like I said, it's really changed the way that I think about consuming. I also fast, so I eat one. I tend to only eat about one meal a day. Sometimes I do one or two, but and so like I really appreciate that meal, because like by the time I get to it, I'm very hungry, and my body tells me when it's time, because like I'll be running. My energy level is absolutely amazing, and because I work with incarcerated youth, everything's so fast paced that my energy level has got to be actually above theirs because I got to be able to keep up and more. And so, you know, it's just the benefits for me also helps keep me on the path because, you know, you
It's
figure
nice to feel good, right? It just feels good to feel good.
exactly. And, you know, I love the fact that, you know, like I'm working and, you know, I just found out like maybe last week, people found out my real age. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm almost a 40-year-old man. I'm 36. And they were like, we would never have given you that, you know? And so
Yeah.
I like looking and feeling every bit and being able to think every bit as youthfully as people, I guess people think I am.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. So, I mean, I love that you are sort of rethinking your relationship to food. But does it make you feel, because it sounded like you started carnivore super strict, which is, you know, great. That's one way to start it. Did you feel isolated at all because you're now not eating like your family? You know, food carries culture. So when you stop eating certain things, did you feel sort of isolated from, I mean, we're always Black, but did you feel isolated from, you know, Black culture or your family?
Not really. And I think the good thing is because my parents have been on so much of these journeys with me, like, and it's funny when it comes to health and fitness, I'm usually that person who kind of like starts a new thing. And then my dad will usually be the next person to join. And then my mom gets jealous of the conversations that we're having. She's like, well, I want to do it. So that's how CrossFit and keto started with us. You know, everybody else was like, nah, we're not doing the whole carnivore thing. That's way too strict. My partner actually is carnivore as well. And so he and I actually um, support each other. So I'm not isolated in that way. But I will say the good thing is that, my family, because they understand who we are and what we're doing, and they've seen the benefits of keto, of course, in their own lives. So they're just like, I mean, we get it, you know. I will say sometimes, you know how grandmas are.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
so it's like, well, you know, it's not going to kill you. I mean, yeah, I know that, but but still, I'm trying to stick to my diet. So sometimes that can be a thing. Um, but I think also what it's caused me to do is question some of the assumptions that we have made about what Black food culture is. Um, some of the bad information that's out there. So we know that a lot of African American cuisine now can be, well, actually, a lot of African American, Caribbean, Latino cuisine can be tied directly to the continent, directly to practices on the continent. But I kept hearing this thing about, well, we're eating too much meat. We're eating too much meat, and African diets are vegetable, are plant based.
Hmm.
So I did the research, and I started looking at how cultures have been eating over time and in place and all across the continent. I'm just like, where are people getting this? Because I don't see any evidence of it, none. I mean, and even to the point where when I started looking up just, let's say, vegetarianism or veganism writ large through history across the continent, I mean, across the world, across the globe, what I got was basically these were fringe groups of thinkers. So you might have had Greek philosophers who said, I believe in doing no harm to anything living, or, you might have had, certain sects of South Asian or Asian uh, religious or philosophical traditions that believed in doing no harm to animals and thusly eating only vegetarian and let's be real, veganism is really a very modern thing. Like, it has not existed in the way that people have tried to say that it has across time. Um, and so I was just like, where's the proof of this? And I realized that it's probably a good deal more propaganda and it's an assumptive logic. It's the assumption that plants, because traditionally we have used plants as medicine, that plants are the best for you. But like I tell people, I was like, okay, if plants are medicine, and I use plants as medicine, but if plants are medicine, aspirin's medicine. Have you ever just binged a bottle of aspirin?
It's not dinner. Yeah.
And so when I started, I think another thing that I liked about carnivore is that, as a person who practices an indigenous African tradition spiritually, we
Oh,
hold
me
the
too. Which one?
I'm Palo Mayombe.
Ah, yeah.
you know,
Well, I was initially initiated into Palo, but then moved on to Ifa. So that's what my
nice.
mom and I have been doing. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Mhm.
But for us understanding that all life is sacred, the idea that plants are killable, but animals are not, um, is very just not us. It's not our thing. And so for me, I loved the fact that carnivore treats plants as having a motive will to reproduce, to procreate, to to defend themselves. And
Mhm.
they do that in ways that, I mean, they defend themselves against us too. And it ends up, those chemicals end up affecting us. And so we have um, ways of exhibiting that. And I think the problem comes in too, which is one thing that I've actually recently come into understanding, is that too often we look for allergic responses. So it's like, if it doesn't immediately affect me negatively, I'm good to go. But
Mhm.
we're not thinking about cumulative, the cumulative response. And so, people are wondering like, my eczema is flaring up, or, gosh, I got a lot of dandruff now, or whatever. And it's because it's not
Mhm.
because you're having any kind of allergic reaction. It's because this thing has built up, and now your body is saying, I'm rejecting this. And
Mhm.
but by the time you realize that, you've eaten so many different things that you can't pinpoint exactly what it was that's been building up in your system, usually. And so, yeah, it's just the ideologies around it. I think in a lot of ways, changing our relationship to food, our understanding about not only food, but also life. Um, I think that would help ground the cultural understandings that maybe we think we have around food. Because the fact of the matter is, African American culture, Caribbean culture, Latino culture has all come into contact with, with the colonial hegemony. And so because of that, it's marked by that as well. And so I think that if we were to say, well, what does our science say? What do our knowledge systems say? And what's the truth about our history and how we have traditionally eaten, how we have evolved to eat, not only as Black people, but shoot, as a quote unquote species, um, then we might be able to actually, I'm not going to say change or alter the culture. I don't think that there's a need for that, but I do think to ground it in something different, something that's going to be a great deal more advantageous to us. Because I don't like the idea that it's so easy to pathologize Black culinary culture because of the prevalence of heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, and honestly, a lot of other types of illnesses and syndromes and diseases that are diet related, but also preventable. And we're dying of those the most, maybe other than Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, even with them being cut off from indigenous traditional food ways, food knowledges, it's death. It is a death sentence.
Yeah, I would like to ask you two things. So one, I think it's really awesome that you were looking into what were the indigenous, subsistence patterns for, for African peoples across the continent. I think that, that's information that's not really out there. I was, getting my PhD in anthropology, so I was always interested in that sort of thing, and I studied it. Sometimes when I have conversations, especially with like Black vegans, who, I think that people use veganism, or Black people use veganism as a way to, to sort of fight racism, to fight, the oppression that we have experienced in this country. And so, in as part of that, they want to throw out everything that is learned through, through white people. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it makes me feel like it makes me feel like, I want to say, hey, all of these anthropologists, who studied like, Africans for like the past, 50,000, 100,000 years, this is what the research says. But at the same time, it's, that's still all, I'm learning this information all through white people. So I don't know, maybe it is all a lie, as I've been told. But it seems, it's hard for me to believe that. And I feel like I would love to hear if you, especially as you're dealing with young men, sort of framing what is masculinity, how to perform masculinity in a way that is affirming and helpful rather than challenging. Like, what role does meat eating, hunting, like being able to provide for yourself, like, is there any way to, to pull that into, like masculinity for young Black men? Like, I don't know, I'm curious to your thoughts on that. Does that make any sense?
No, it completely does, because one of the biggest, most hated arguments by me is this whole idea that eating meat is a masculinist thing, right? Which is why I think that when I started seeing, when I started looking at your videos, I was like, oh, thank God. Because one, so when we talk about masculinism, as an individual who studies and who does a lot of reading in Black studies, Black critical thought, there isn't a masculinity that Black men possess that can shape the country's consumptive culture. And so the idea that we take this up as saying this is masculinist, yes, I will say that Black men can aspire to a certain kind of recognition through certain types of performances of masculinity. But the idea that is masculinist in the way that white men respond to what is a failing, unsustainable patriarchal system, I just don't think that can be applied to us in that way. But also, one thing that I think about is when it comes to Black people, but especially Black men, males, people who are identified as such, is the logics of carcerality, and how captivity itself is applied to us, how animality is applied to us. We are often described as endangered species, right? And so we use this language of animals. But I think about stuff like, there's a few brothers that I follow on Instagram. One is named like The Real Tarzan or something like that. And this is, like he's a brother. He's basically like the Black Steve Irwin. Like he's always like playing with like anacondas or jaguars or something like that. So I think though the idea of building a relationship to and with animals, understanding that like everything deserves to be free, including animals. And so like I think that part of it for me is, like I said, in my tradition, we treat animals well, even though they're about to be killed. Why? Because we're not going to ingest, we're not going to take in unfreedom. Perfect example. I mean, and we see this in different ways, and I guess you can also scientifically explain it. But like I don't eat anything that's been like when you go to the store and they have all the lobsters in the little tank or whatever, like that's an unnatural habitat. There's going to be unnatural things that happen to that meat as they're sitting in there stewing in their own stuff, taking it in, passing it out, taking it, passing it out, and so there's reasons behind our own traditions and why it is that we handle those kinds of things. I think when it comes to the domestication of animals, those practices of care, I think can challenge a kind of way of thinking about masculinity as it is practiced. I think in hunting, I think first of all, it's degendering hunting or ungendering or whatever hunting, because I mean, like you look at the Dahomey people, and you look at the Ahosi, the Minos women, and the women were elephant hunters. So
I didn't know that. So thank you for sharing that.
So this idea that like hunting, or I remember reading about, I want to say it may be the Ibibio people of Nigeria, and fishing, for instance, was considered something that women could do best because fishing was considered a more spiritual endeavor, that women would be better predisposed towards doing successfully. And
so this is really interesting, but I guess this is kind of what I mean, where when people who are against the consumption of meat go in and start retelling who Africans were and how we ate, that takes away a point of pride for us. And so for young men who in previous generations might have looked at the hunter as that's something to look up to be that person in the tribe that's helping feed the whole group and take care of and defending from wild animals or other people, like that's a point of pride. And now young men don't even have like that that archetype, so to speak, to look up to. And that, I wonder, is there any way to bring that back? Does it make sense? Like, I don't know. I mean, I think we all, there are some changes in how we identify and perform our gender, and some of those things are good, but not all of it's good. I don't know that we should be tearing it all down.
Right. And I think that like, and I think too, what happens is because a thing looks like another thing, doesn't mean that they're analogous. It doesn't mean that they will form the same way. It doesn't mean that they are the same thing. And so I think that somebody might look at, certain kinds of ways of being, and they say, oh, that's masculinist because this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, no, that's actually coming out of this thing. This is a sort of historical or cultural vestige, and so the idea of hunting, right? You know, like usually when a lot of times when we tend to lambast hunters, first of all, a lot of times what we do is we tend to go towards the people who are out there doing stuff like killing giraffes for trophies, right? But then you go to the continent, right? And you see that that's not at all the relationship that the people there have with animals. So you have, for instance, I think it's in Kenya, you have the hyena men, right? And they have these lifelong relationships with hyenas and baboons. You have the people in Congo who, right now, mostly men, who basically live amongst rhinos and gorillas, and they care for them and they protect them. And I think sometimes what ends up happening with the conversation is that we essentialize the category man, and thusly we essentialize masculinity, and we don't allow for there to be disparate lineages, because colonial masculinity, yes, can it be performed by, well, really anybody? Sure. But just because a thing looks like another thing doesn't mean that what I'm doing is colonial masculinity. Some of the outcomes may be colonial outcomes, but the performance itself is not always a result of that. And I think that that's, in a lot of ways, to be honest with you, the idea that we are so far removed from the continent that we've lost our culture, I think is not only an insult to an over 300,000 year history, to think that, the past, let's say 1,000 years would be able to erase, 200 plus thousand years of knowledge creation. But also the idea, I mean, like that would literally mean that all of our ancestors just passively accepted everything that was thrown at them, and that they did not do the work themselves to resist, to hold on to what they knew, to hold on to the ideas of another world, another time, that they did not hand that knowledge down, and that it's not here, that it wasn't imprinted on our DNA somehow, or in our souls and spirits. And so I get it. I get the impetus to want to throw off all, let's say, European or Western knowledge. But I think that we've got to be very careful when we start throwing off absolutely everything, because that would assume that all knowledge that has been created in the West is European knowledge, which is to say that only Europeans have created knowledge. And that's just not something that I believe. Really, it's something that I know is not it's not the case. I know you would have people who will argue you down and say, oh no, we've been completely decultured and all that. But I mean, you see it. You could see it. And like you said, there have been so many of us who have been anthropologists on the continent, in the Caribbean, in North America, sociologists, historians, ethnomusicologists, so on and so forth, who have done the work of uncovering these pathways and these lineages of thought and being and culture. And so, we have to look at, I guess, Caribbean scholars do a lot with hybridization. And so, I guess we'd have to look at how knowledge sets rub up against each other. And that might give us a clearer view of what we're doing here. So yeah, I've argued a ton with vegan scholars, Black vegan scholars, and they're like, well, we're inhabiting, or we are exhibiting the the logics of, unfreedom and carcerality and anti-blackness. And I'm like, but are we though? Like, so then my question is always like, is this only in conversation with the modern world? Because if that's the case, then the modern world is our dystopia. We had worlds, those got apocalypse at the time of the transatlantic slave trade. So, you know, if you're not in conversation with ancestry, if you're not in conversation with how ancestry has persisted and insisted, then what are you really doing? So.
Well, I love that you really take a critical lens at, what some of these things that people are saying and really think about whether that makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we just in seeing my response to eating more meat and cutting out sugar from my diet and watching other people, I know how much of a big difference it makes in terms of health. And it's hard to imagine that that people weren't having that level of health, all the time in generations past. I mean, we can see what a difference in our lifestyle is from 100 years ago, and can imagine from 1,000 years ago. So I just it's hard for me to imagine that that people were eating salads and berries and stuff like that 1,000 years ago, and that was what life was. That was most of life. I mean, that was those were bad times when that was going on.
But something that I think COVID has actually kind of like blown the cover off of. I remember seeing a meme where somebody said, well, every 100 years we have a pandemic, right? And so they went back to, I think, Spanish flu or something like that, or something maybe prior to that. And it was like something happened in 1620 and 1720, so on and so forth. And so 2020, the COVID hits, right? And I'm like, so does that mean that pandemics happen every 100 years? Or does that mean that we're just not learning our lesson? And so, but what this really did for me, and, and once again, we see the anti-blackness rear up in this. I've seen a couple of New York Times things that have said, it's a mystery as to why is the African continent not dying as much as everybody else? And I'm like, oh, so you want us to die more?
Yeah.
Thank you for the confidence, but it's, because it's almost like, like we expect certain things to happen, like Africa is the place for people to die, right? Like that's where death happens. Once again, it's that idea of tying death and loss to Black people as though it's something that belongs to us inherently, or essentially. But but one thing that I was questioning in the whole conversation around COVID is, yes, if you want to go get vaccinated, go get vaccinated. Like if you want to do the medicine, do that, right? But we're not talking about immunity, and we're not talking about how, more than likely, if we were to be very honest about how people's bodies are doing metabolically, most of us are immunocompromised.
Mm-hmm.
But moreover, my question comes from the idea of paradigms of health, right? Ever since people crossed on this particular piece of land, we have not had or known a paradigm of wellness. The Europeans who were coming here were sick people. They made the natives very sick. And then they brought a bunch of malnourished, brutalized Black people here. And so we, out of this particular melding of various kinds of social, psychological, physiological, mental illnesses, we're somehow supposed to create some kind of understanding or paradigm of health that could harken back to a time where we knew wellness here. That just hasn't existed. So like, where will we be getting this paradigm from? And the issue that I have is that Black people have been kind of written off as knowledge creators. But then as soon as you start having health issues and stuff like that, you run to Tanzania and you study the Hadza, and you study other hunter-gatherer groups, across the planet, people whose knowledge you have called primitive, right? Like knowledge that you have literally said that people who live in today's world do not belong to today. And so in so many ways, not only does, and I know that too, veganism is not just a diet, it can be a political and ideological set as well. And I think that it actually might be important for those of us who are carnivore to develop something alongside that is kind of like an adjudication of that particular set of knowledges, because they're doing that. A lot of ours tends to be about health, but I think for Black and Indigenous peoples, Black and other Indigenous peoples, I'll say that, what this really lends itself to is a question of whether or not how we create knowledge, what's considered knowledge now. So the epistemological questions, that should be critiqued on this level as well. I think this idea of what modernity is can be questioned through all of that, because it's like we are taught that certain things are modern, certain things are civilized, and that is the direction in which we're all supposed to move. But as soon as, first of all, we have no say in whether or not we can move in a certain direction. But then as soon as, everything is moving in that direction, coerced or not, it's like, oh, well, let's go study these quote unquote primitive people. And let's see what they've been doing. Let's see how they've been eating. I recently saw either a study or a documentary, I can't remember, that came out, and they were talking about the people of Melanesia and Polynesia and their diets. And they're talking about a lot of fat, of course, from stuff like, like coconuts and stuff like that, but also sea turtles. They're talking about how much fish and like sea turtles and stuff like that they're eating. And so I'm just like, makes sense.
Well, I think it was an interesting point you were making about veganism. Like one thing that I think is, so many of us take it, and it's a way of expressing your political stance of being anti-racist, maybe anti-capitalist, and anti-whatever. And but I feel like, I hate to think that our voices standing up against racism get caught up in veganism, and I'm starting to hear people use race theory to talk about animal rights, which really I hate that, or Black veganism. I think that's what they call it, to use race theory to talk about animal rights. But I feel like I would hate to think any Black person thinks that using their vegan diet as an opportunity to protest, what we see in this country today. And so I hope that, I may try to make it as clear as possible, and why I do this and why I try to get other people to eat this way is so that we are strong enough and healthy enough to be out there protesting and marching in the streets. Because, we, at this point, we're getting so sick that a lot of us cannot do that, like literally cannot do that. And we need our strength, because, I think America is going in a not great direction. And I think there's a portion of the population that is, will burn this country down before they let us have any of it. And so, we need to be strong and ready. And so, I kind of wonder, is this vegan message being pushed, in our community to, to continue to weaken and to derail, people who might otherwise be, putting their attention to the right place?
It's so funny that you say that, because I feel like too, there's a particular way that anti-blackness works, such that I believe it's her name is Salamawit Terefe. She's an Afro-pessimist thinker, and I've been reading some of her stuff, and I remember she said, even when there's no white people in the room, there are white people in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what's interesting to me about that is that the way that anti-blackness works on the psyches of all of us, really, like none of us escape it. And we begin to do the work of white supremacy, of anti-blackness, of empire, of colonialism ourselves. I have seen this too. I remember looking at something with a couple of different vegans. And the thing is, now what's interesting to me, they're using race theory. There's not a black person among them, right? And it was a particular talk, and I was just like, really, I just cut it off. I was like, I'm done with this. But once again, I think it goes back to the assumptions that we make, right? I think it goes back to the assumptions that the human is a universally accepted or even honored category, or that it has existed in the way that it does now across all of time. That species itself is a legitimate, or specialization is a legitimate way of categorizing living things. I even think that for a lot of us who would come from, various indigenous traditions, would even have to throw in there the fact that sometimes we don't hold just animals and plants, or just animals, to be conscious or sentient members of a planetary community. And so I think that the agenda of anti-blackness is going to continue bolstering itself through us, through everyone. And I think that one of the ways that it has done that is it has called us to accept certain things as universally true, historically true, as fixed, as given, as what's the word, a priori. So like, it's just the idea that, once again, it goes back to questioning everything, to saying that like this is a question of the episteme. Like, we've got to say, what are we really doing, And so when I look at stuff like Chrisette Michele saying I was vegan and quite literally my body could not do this any longer, why aren't we talking about that louder? Or I remember going keto, and I remember having several vegans come into my inbox and say, look, this is what I'm experiencing, and I'm not sure if I can do this. And some of them have been vegans for over a decade,
Did you do veganism or?
And for me, I'm not gonna lie, like I'm a meat lover. Like, I have always been a meat lover. Now, what I will say is this: I did go through a period where what I would do is greatly reduce the amount of meat I was eating. I was eating mostly like salads, and I was doing I tried doing the whole tofu thing,
Oh, yeah.
and like, and I think for me too, just doing all of that, like, I was like gassy all the time, and I was having joint aches more often, and I thought that was just like me. And the thing they tell you, right? Oh, that's your body detoxing. Like, detoxing sucks. This feels like hell. So, but yeah, I've never been able to go full vegan. And honestly, I didn't think I was going to be able to go full carnivore, but going keto, I think, helped because I had already had the experience of being clearer thinking. And, and this goes back to something you were talking about with the protest being healthier. Working in a prison, one thing that I'm constantly thinking about is how we do things differently. I mean, technically, like prisons don't really work. They make me feel no safer. So like we shouldn't really even have them. But when it comes to like how we're doing things, like I look at the amount of conflict, right, that we have. And I think about things like if we were to try, let's just say an animal-based, animal-based or carnivore diet, and the kids were able to think more clearly, right? If they felt better. These are severely traumatized individuals. And so you can imagine the amount of depression and stress that's living in their bodies, on their bodies. And, if we were to look at ways of getting that out of them through the food, just through the food, let's not even talk about bringing in other types of, therapeutic, mindful types of practices. But just through that, and I think about that all the time. I have a friend who does security training and defense training with martial arts and firearms. And one thing that I've talked to him about is like, have y'all started talking about diet? Because y'all talk about de-escalation, but when your mind is always cloudy or you've never known the clarity of a keto mind, when anxiety and stress sits on your body physiologically, when your inflammatory markers are already all over the place, and then on top of that, you add the stress of poverty, of perhaps having to do illegal things because you're trying to support your family, are we setting people up to be able to resolve conflict successfully? Like, to resolve a conflict, you have to have a lot of different things. It's not just verbal skills, you have to have that clarity of mind. You have to be able to have the clarity of body,
So are you able to share this with the, with the young men that you teach?
Yes. And what's interesting is this, as a music teacher, what I do is I utilize their music, hip hop, to talk about any of a number of things. And so we've actually been broaching, as a matter of fact, next week is manhood and masculinity. Whew. So, but no, these are definitely things that I have thought about and that we've talked about. They, like in talking to them about their own wellness, and how they might be able to advocate for themselves, so definitely conversations that I would be willing to have with them and that I want to, and so, just
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah. Well, can you tell us more about what your carnivore diet looks like now? Have things changed and evolved from what you were doing before?
So yeah, I do use more seasonings now. That had to come back because I was like, I can't just keep doing salted meat. Actually, I will say this. So when I did the first 30 days of my carnivore, I did not do a whole lot of organ meat. But now, because I am starting to go to more stores that have these relationships and stuff like that, I'm a lot of bit more experimental now. Like I'm in the store and I'm like, oh, here's a rabbit. Let me pick it up. Of course, with that I got
Wow. That is experimental. All right. Nice.
Or, I'll look and say, oh, they got a beef heart, let me see what I might be able to do with this. Now, for me, it's always about whether or not I can find a recipe. Because I don't always know how to prepare everything. And I'm one of those people, like, if I can't find a recipe, throw it in the Instapot.
Well, maybe go back to Julia Childs. I feel like her cookbooks have like a lot of random stuff that we don't think about eating these days.
Okay, see, and I never would have known that. So I'll do that, because to be honest with you, but I will say this too, I'm very cautious now with certain things. Like, I started realizing how badly garlic sits in my system. Oh, I mean,
that was the first herb that I tried to bring back when I went carnivore, and like the first 2 weeks I just did ground beef and butter. And then that was one of the first things I brought back, and it tasted so horrible. I threw out the whole bowl. I could not eat the ground beef, and I've not ever had garlic since then. So it was really bad.
Yeah, like garlic and onions tend to repeat on me real bad. I get real bad indigestion, heartburn and stuff like that. And so I do suffer from acid reflux. So I'm very careful about those kinds of things. I cut out wheat, you know, every now and again. And I mean, like, really like maybe once a month, I may do like a sweet potato. I really missed those. Like, I don't miss potatoes, but sweet potatoes, like, yeah, I missed those. So I might do that. When I go places, like, and I'm eating with my parents, or my grandma cooks or something like that, I do collard greens. I do those kinds of things. But even to the point where I realized how bad broccoli and cauliflower were messing with me. And so, so yeah, I don't do those anymore. In the mornings, I will do coffee because I need it in my life. But
how about stevia? Do you do that? And what about dairy?
I do dairy, but actually I don't do a lot of like milk or cream. Like, when I do dairy, or in that form, when I do dairy, it's either cheese or yogurt. And for me, that's just keeping my gut kind of regulated. But yeah, for me, it's just finding different ways to experiment with meat, eggs. Actually, when it comes to my yogurt, I do, because it's still animal based, and I love the way that it digests and the way it makes me feel. I use honey. And so I'll sweeten my yogurt with that. And what I have found is that it actually doesn't knock me out of ketosis. It surprised me, because I was like, I just know it's gonna knock me out, and I'm gonna be 13 pounds heavier tomorrow, right? Because, like, for me, even and that's another thing. I didn't do this for weight loss or gain. I did this for health. But what I found is, like, I could eat a honey bun and literally in 2 days gain 12 pounds from water weight.
Yeah.
And like, that would change a lot in my life, because especially when I was teaching Zumba, carrying around 12 extra pounds for an hour, dancing and jumping and stuff like that's a lot. So my joints would feel it. But yeah, from when I first began, like, I think I was so worried about doing everything right and being like right by the book, that everything was very redundant. And I mean, it was like for the first 4 weeks, quite literally, it was like chicken, steak, pork, seafood, chicken, steak, pork every day. That's how it was going. And I would do eggs with almost everything, like steak and eggs, pork chop and eggs, not fish and eggs, because I don't, no. But and so, but now I've gotten a great deal more creative, and that has helped. And the food is great. Like, it tastes good. I'm also doing stuff like, I save my fat, so when I do my bone broth, I render my tallow. When I cook bacon, I save that and I season with it. And so that's cut down the amount of other seasonings that I have to use because I have that. I go now to the store and I get the powdered shrimp, and I use that as a seasoning too.
Wow, I didn't even know that was a thing.
I
Cool.
I didn't either until I started watching Latino and African cooks, and they would talk about like fish powder and shrimp powder, and I was like,
Wow.
and so we actually have now I found out that the company, I guess it's pronounced Badia, who makes all
Oh
this,
yeah.
they have a little packet of like the ground shrimp, but we actually have a store here that's halal, and also that is it's West African inspired, and yeah, you can pick up all kinds of things there that they season food with. There's like other animal products, so it's really pretty cool. So it's also helped me get in contact. So I've started even like cooking things like and going and saying like how do Nigerians or Ghanaians or Ivorians like cook this or use this thing, and so that kind of stuff, and trying to find a good place to get goat around here, but I haven't found that yet. So
Mhm. Wow. Well, it sounds like you found like a happy medium for yourself, and like, it sounds like things are good. So that's awesome. And do you feel like you are comfortable to continue this, indefinitely going forward?
definitely, and honestly, I will say this: it's kind of done. Other foods have kind of done that for me,
Hmm.
in that you know if I go to a party and I eat a piece of cake, I'll sleep for 14 hours because it'll like literally knock me out for that long. But then I also wake up sore, you know,
Hmm.
having, like sore all over. And I'm like, I haven't worked out. All I did was, eat a piece of cake and now my whole body hurts. Um, or I'll eat certain things, certain things made with like corn products and stuff like corn, like ground corn and stuff like that, upset my stomach now.
Hmm.
And so a lot of it for me is just like, well, it's easy for me to walk past, all of the bread aisle and stuff like that, because just looking at that stuff, I'm like, my stomach's already hurting, just thinking about it. But also I eat and I'm full, but I'm not miserable. It's so funny because at work sometimes people are like, you're not hungry? I'm like, not really. Now sometimes I am, but even through that with the fasting and the carnivore, my energy level is like amazing all day long. And once I start getting sleepy, I'm like, okay, it's time to eat. And
Hmm.
I eat something and I'm like, let's go again, So, and that's kind of how it goes. I mean, and it really is like living the idea that food is fuel, because when my tank is low, I start to slow down. And as soon as I fill it back up, it's time to go again. And I'm good to go immediately.
Hmm.
Um, I was telling somebody that one time my dad and I went out to lunch together and we both got 16-ounce steaks. So I ate mine. And he got like halfway through his, he was like, oh, I'm done. I was like, well, take it with you. He's like, no. I'm like, um,
No, you're taking that with you.
right. So finally I reached across and I ate it, right? So you figure I've had roughly like 24 ounces of steak. I get home 30 minutes later and I go run 4 miles. And
Wow.
he was like, you didn't feel sick or heavy? Not at all.
Hmm.
Not at all. And so, I've noticed those kinds of things. My body, I love that. I love like when I go hiking, I'm good to go all day long. I go out, spend some time canoeing on the river, and it's just like I take the bacon jerky or whatever with me. We can go all day long. I pop a few of those, midday at lunch or something like that. Go up and down the river as long as we want. And so I think part of it is, though, and I guess this actually kind of goes back to your question about masculinity. and how things have, and also culture, how things have been written off for us, because I'm trying to get back into nature and traveling and going to the mountains, to the beach, so on and so forth, going hiking, canoeing, kayaking. Those have been kind of written off for us, right? Like those are things that a lot of times you see people say camping, that's white people stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so like I have people who have come to me and they'll say, like, what should I do with fitness, and I'm trying to get fit, and so well, one, why, like, fitness always begs a context. Like, fit to do what? Michael Phelps looks a lot different than a basketball player, who looks a lot different from a person who runs track short distances versus long distance. So like, fit to do what? And if the answer is I just want to live a better quality life, I want to be fit enough to do the things I want to do, to go dancing all night long, to go hiking, to feel great, then for me, it's just kind of like, eat the right kinds of foods and go do those things, got to warm up to it. I'm not gonna lie, when I first started hiking, I was like, oh God, because first we didn't choose an easy trail. but but it's kind of like, I do this because I want to live an amazing quality life, and for a long time. And I guess you might be able to say for some people that is being able to go and eat whatever they want to eat in different countries, but that's not me. Like, the life that I want to live, I want to be able to travel and dance and party and go to different places in nature and spend my day there and feel great doing it. And so I'm eating for that reason, for that purpose.
Mm-hmm. I love it. So, it really is a different way of thinking about, Blackness, Black culture. It's not all about the food. We can still be Black, and we can, live bigger lives where we are actually fit enough to do all of these things and travel and walk around and do stuff. So, that's amazing. So I have kept you so long, and this has been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed it, but we're going to have to come to a close. So if people want to hear more from you, where do they find you? How do they connect?
So anywhere online, just type in Voodoo Monkey Foot, and and for me that is VoodooMunkyFut, Voodoo Monkey Foot, and that's voodoomonkeyfoot.com. That's Voodoo Monkey Foot on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. I will put I'll put all the links below. You can for those of you watching, you can just go below and click on the links. But I really look forward to seeing more of your posts, and for you continuing to be a voice and a champion for for better health in the Black community, because that's what this is really all about.
Definitely. And once again, I just want to say thank you. And this actually is not even just a thank you for the honor of being able to speak with you here, but it's really a thank you for being that voice that really in a lot of ways gave me permission to embark on this way of life. And so and to challenge so many of the ways that I was thinking, and also challenge from a very different perspective, and from the perspective of food, culture, consumption, so on and so forth. And so I will continue being an absolute adoring fan.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
That I'm always putting your voice out there too, because like I said in that post, I'm not gonna lie, they always say believe Black women, and I did, and it has changed me.
Well, I am here for us, and I just want to see us succeed.
Definitely. Same.
Okay, everyone. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you soon. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.